Today's guest has built a career around helping businesses think bigger than their local market. Samir Musayev is a commercial account director with Export Development Canada, where he works closely with Canadian companies looking to expand internationally and navigate the opportunities and challenges of global trade. Samir is originally from Azerbaijan, but now based in Calgary. He brings a truly international perspective shaped by experience across finance, business development, and international markets. He is also the host of the Global Nomads podcast, where he explores entrepreneurship, leadership, and the stories of people building businesses across borders. Samir, welcome to the Future Ventures Scaling with Clarity podcast.
Hi, Maxim. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today and record this podcast with you.
I am super excited. I know you and I have known each other for quite a few years, but it's the first time that I'm having you on the podcast. And why don't we start with kind of like you are an immigrant, I'm an immigrant. It's kind of funny. My daughter yesterday came and interviewed me. She's like, "You're the only immigrant I know. Can I interview you for my school project?" I'm like, "What about mom?" But mom grew up here, so for her, there's no accent, there's nothing. So I was the immigrant. I've been here for 30 years. Anyways, what was your journey? How did you come to Canada? Why Canada? What attracted you here?
Well, when we were discussing this with my wife, and this is many moons ago, we're thinking about different countries, and Canada made the most sense to us in terms of both welcomeness and how Canada is built a lot by immigrants. And so,
Hmm.
honestly, one of the things we found here is that everyone is an immigrant. So you're not feeling really left out. You're part of the community, part of the different communities. You can see cultures come together, cultures mingle, benefit from the best experience that each people have,
Yeah.
and that's what really attracted us. And then when we were looking at different cities, we chose Calgary for a number of specific reasons. And one of those reasons was Calgary was the third best city to live in globally when we
Yeah.
were immigrating. So, that was kind of an obvious choice. You want to live in a great city. In addition, my cousin was here, so that was also kind of a benefit to have someone close, family
Hmm.
here. So, but looking back, we've never regretted the decision. We love Calgary. We love the people here. We love the entrepreneurial mindset of the people here and the openness. The willingness to connect, to help each other. That is a great advantage that Calgary has.
Hmm. I mean, Calgary is an amazing city. We moved to Calgary in 2006, and that was the year that Calgary turned 1 million people in population. I think that I don't remember what the latest census poll states, but I think we're at 1.75 or something like that. That's
I
like
think,
20 years later. Yeah.
yeah, it's something around those numbers, and I think it doubles during Stampede. So,
Yes, it does. And the beat time is coming along. Is there something that I mean, you grew up in Azerbaijan, but you studied internationally. Is there something that you're missing from Azerbaijan, kind of like, or is it just kind of friends and family?
well, I will say that Azerbaijan and Calgary is a bit similar in the way because Azerbaijan's main economic drivers are agriculture and oil and gas, same as
Hmm.
Canada. So, industry-wise, it's very similar. From a perspective of um, kind of the mixing of people is also similar because Azerbaijan, especially Baku, the capital, is a very multinational city.
Hmm.
What I miss the most, I would say, outside friends and family is food. That's the biggest thing. We have a big food culture, and the variety of different types of food back home is
Yeah.
amazing. So, unfortunately, there are no Azerbaijani restaurants, and I'm not the one to start a restaurant, but maybe some of the people listening to you will be inspired and they say, "Hey, we need to start an Azerbaijani restaurant
Yeah.
in Calgary." Like, I would
Yeah.
be the most happiest and the most loyal customer there.
Interesting. Is there a sizable Azerbaijani community in Calgary, or that's not the case?
No, I would say
Yes.
yes. Again, because of oil and gas, a lot of engineers, a lot of people, different professionals who work in the oil and gas field, be that finance, be that HR. A lot of them are ex BP employees, British
Hmm.
Petroleum, not to mix with
Hmm.
Boston Pizza, but and this has happened to a couple of friends of mine, so that's why I'm saying that. But there's a sizable community, and I
Yeah,
really enjoy the community because it's a very united community here. We
nice.
organize events together, have New Year celebrations, Nowruz celebrations. We raised the flag recently, so yeah, do a lot of things.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I mean, that's great when you're staying close to the community. Um, just before we move off the personal side and talk about business and scaling, um, you are very well known around the city. You're expert networker. Kind of look, what's the biggest misconception that people have about building meaningful professional relationships?
I guess, first of all, thank you for your compliment. I appreciate that. I try to be active in the market, and as an immigrant, that's the biggest challenge, is that you're not growing up with the same people as your peers are growing up with. Uh, I have a lot of friends who are my age, but they went to university with other professionals, and it's kind of easier
Hmm.
to grow their network
Hmm.
for them because they knew those people from very from early on. So I guess the biggest misconception is exactly that the immigrant's challenge is to start building a network from scratch, and sometimes people may assume that no, it's as easy as for everyone else, but unfortunately it's not. You have to do the double, the triple of the effort, being
Hmm.
in more places and finding ways to remind yourself or to remind about yourself to people that you have met, because
Hmm.
this is what I tell to a lot of people who move here and ask me for networking advice. I ask them, if you go to a networking event, how many people do you meet? So let's assume it's 10 people. How many of those 10 people would remember you, do you think, after, let's say, a week? Maybe 3 people. How many of them will remember you after a month? Maybe one person. So, what do you do to make sure that you stay in touch and you stay top of mind on for
Hmm.
those people? I found personally LinkedIn to be that answer. I use
Hmm.
LinkedIn all the time. I publish things on LinkedIn and I try to make it, different styles because I have some more fun stuff. I have professional stuff that I put on the page. I have an article that just got published and I published it today also. So different things, but that way people see you on LinkedIn and
Hmm.
they remember you. And I
Hmm.
find that to be the best way because at the end of the day, it's important to be remembered by people.
Hmm. Hmm. You have any kind of like a crazy hack in terms of like wearing like insanely gaudy, colorful shoes or crazy hair or like a clothing item that makes you stand out or makes you memorable?
Well, I was thinking of those items. I have some friends who have colorful glasses. To your point,
Yeah, yeah,
I know some people who like their jackets and they're always choosing their jackets, or some people who like some socks or find interesting kind of shoes to be remembered by. And this has happened unintentionally, but I always have like a little bag, and people remember me by my bag now, which was unintentional. I guess it's a Eastern European thing that having a
yeah.
little
It
bag
is.
with different type of
It
things.
is. Yeah, the Borsellino. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Or the fancy new term MERS.
Yep, exactly. But I found it funny that people remember me by that. So you don't know what something that you use out of habit becomes a symbol of
Yeah.
what people remember you by.
Yeah, yeah, that's so interesting. But you found it like there's an item of clothing that now it's associated with you.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Samir, if we're to talk about international trade and exporting, I'm super interested in getting your perspective because you sit at the intersection. You have a bird's eye view of trade and export. And I don't know to what extent these statistics are true, but my understanding is that many Canadian companies say they want to export, but very few actually do. What's the real barrier for those companies? Is it capital knowledge? Is it theory? Is it something else? I mean, I know we have the Trade Commissioner Service. There's lots of resources out there. What's holding Canadian companies back from hitting it on the export market?
I think it's a combination of aspects. Personally, one of those things is with the amount of companies that I talk to, I find that there is a little lack of knowledge in terms of going to international markets. It's not an easy kind of thing to do. Because if you're looking at traditionally, Canadian companies would export to the US, and US is great because you can put things on a truck and you can just send the truck across the border, and it's quite simple. Plus, there's no
Mhm,
language barriers. There, the culture is more or less similar, and the legislation is easy to understand and comprehend for the Canadian businesses. Plus, there's a lot of advisors that can help you to expand into the US. With other international markets, I guess there's a couple of nuances. First of all, there's a lack of knowing those markets. So in some markets, you need to have people to be aware of you. Like you will not be able to close a deal through an email. You have to be there. You have to travel.
mhm,
You have to shake hands, spend time with those
mhm,
people, so to build trust. So it takes time. The second thing is when it comes to let's say transportation. I've had conversations where I've been explaining to people what a bill of lading is, or what kind of transportation documents exist in general, what Incoterms they should be interested
mhm,
or looking at
mhm,
considering, how those things are structured. Even the way some documents are signed, I find it interesting that the basic commercial terms, and I'm not just talking about like the Incoterms, but I'm talking about in general, like how do you get paid? What are the documents required for you to get paid? Like those kind of
uh,
nuances. People typically don't have a lot of experience in, so that kind of makes it challenging because usually with people, if you don't know, you don't want to touch it because you're afraid of making mistakes. But then
mhm,
again, there's a lot of resources. To your point, the Trade Commissioner Services, EDC is one of those resources. The government of Alberta also has a very strong trade team that is dedicated to help Albertan companies in particular. There's the Trade Accelerator program that is offered by Calgary Economic
Calgary economic.
Development.
Mhm,
So there's a lot of resources out there. And I guess because there's a lot of resources, it may be a little bit overwhelming at the same time, just because you don't know where to start. But I think if you are the first time exporter, the best way to start is going to a TAP program. TAP will give you a good foundation, but then also having conversations with people like myself, if you're in Calgary, or people like my colleagues at the Trade Commissioner Services, just to start those conversations and help shape it, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to
mhm,
make sure that exporting becomes more accessible and that you are being successful in those international markets. Because we want to make sure that when you're taking the Canadian flag and going into those new places, the flag is waving strongly, and at the same time
mhm.
you're able to bring foreign money into Canada.
Samir, you've seen a ton of companies in the different roles in banking, but now with EDC. Have you developed some kind of a pattern recognition in terms of what companies are successful in achieving export success versus the ones that are not? And are there common pitfalls that companies should be on the lookout when focusing on growing the export market?
I guess the biggest thread is the companies that are not as successful are usually the ones that are not as serious about exports. Because
Mm-hmm,
the best way to say it, export is like taking a mirror and looking at yourself and or inside the company. Because if you have any cracks, those cracks will become evident when you're exporting.
mm-hmm,
So you want to make sure that you're not approaching export as a one-time thing, but you're building a company around the notion that you will be exporting sooner or later. Canada's market is limited. We're only, what is it, 40 million right now in
mm-hmm,
Canada. So if you're thinking about real growth opportunities, you have to be thinking about growing internationally, and you have to be strategic about your approach to
mm-hmm,
exports. You cannot say, hey, I'm gonna think about going to, let's say, the UK and ship a couple of goods there and that's it. No, like it has to be strategic. You have to build those relationships. And the ones that are successful is the ones who approach it as a growth target and do it
mm-hmm.
diligently. Just like with anything in business, you have to make sure that you have a strategy and you're slowly executing on that strategy.
Super. Samir, is there a region or are there regions that Canadian businesses are overlooking that they're just hold a lot of potential? We're just not thinking about them.
I would say the Asia Pacific region has been one of those regions. EDC has done tremendous amount of investments into helping Canadian businesses go into those markets. We have a lot of offices there as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes in general there's a perception of the, I'm going to call it the sexy markets, just because you're looking at, let's say, Western European markets, you're looking at the USA, you're looking at Australia, and those markets are more developed. So you're thinking, oh, I'm going to have more success. But those markets are also, it's more difficult to
Mm-hmm.
compete in, because there's
Mm-hmm.
other established companies that would have the
Mm-hmm.
same type of culture, would have the same types of principles in terms of technology and what they're using and all those kind of stuff. But whereas if you're going to some less developed markets, they still have the capacity to pay. They still, they're growing, especially in the, like I said, in the Asia Pacific markets. The mid-market segment there is increasingly growing. And of course, that will mean that there's going to be more people that are able to pay for goods and services that Canadian companies provide. And I guess that's the biggest misconception that happens when people are thinking about which market to go to. The other nuance to take into account that when you're thinking about, which markets, you have to understand who your competition is going to be in those markets. Is it going to be easy to compete? Will your product have demand? Do you need to adapt your product to that particular market? Do you need to change maybe the coloring scheme or maybe the name? Because sometimes you can read a lot of those stories where companies did not adapt their marketing strategy, did not adapt their even logo strategy, and had failures in different markets. So you have to
Mm-hmm.
do some background research. My favorite example on a company being very unsuccessful is Target entering the Canadian market, because if there's a book about how to successfully navigate expansion to international markets, I would suggest your listeners to read a couple of articles about what Target did incorrectly. And
Mm-hmm.
they basically hit every single point that they should not do, and they did it. And that's why they were unsuccessful here when they entered the Canadian market. So do your research, understand it, and plus understand where there will be demand, like I said. Because what I'm seeing right now, for example, Asia Pacific, they do enjoy a lot of agricultural products from Canada. I see more and more agricultural products, be that on the primary ag of things, or be that on the secondary or on the food
Mm-hmm.
processing side, more companies exporting to those regions.
Interesting. Um, in addition to agriculture, so from a region specific, you talked about Asia Pacific. From a opportunity or industry specific, what are the growth opportunities there? Is it agriculture? Like what other industries are ripe for export?
Well, all industries are ripe for export, to be honest, as long as you find your right
Market?
market. Exactly. And that's the key is preparing a business plan and understanding which markets are right for you. There are tools that you can search online. Some of those are free, some of those are not free, to see which markets import your goods. And you can then
Mm-hmm.
identify and say, okay, if this market imports my good, let's see if there is some kind of competition in those markets. Who are the main importers?
Mm-hmm.
And you can say, okay, if the main importers um, are from, let's say, Europe, are from Australia, maybe it will be more difficult for Canadian market company to enter,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe it will be easier. So you have to understand also those nuances. So yeah, it's honestly case by case, I would say. And for each individual company, I'm gonna say do your research to be able to better understand what kind of a market you want to enter it, because
Mm-hmm.
you can find success in a market that people typically don't think about just because that market is underpenetrated.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is kind of the alpha that everyone is looking at, like markets that they overlooked but hold a lot of promise. Um, Selling into governments, foreign governments, what's the interrelationship between EDC and CCC? Like, do you guys team up, or if a company is looking to export or to sell into foreign governments, kind of like how should companies approach it?
So the way EDC is structured, EDC is more about supporting the Canadian businesses.
Mm-hmm.
We uh, kind of when you're selling to a foreign government, there could be a couple of nuances that happen. First of all, you may have a cash crunch because you're not getting paid on time. And it's not because they're paying you late per se,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe those are the terms that you negotiated with them. So that's
Mm-hmm.
where with EDC would come in terms of mitigating some of those working capital requirements that the company may have. The other nuance I always find is when you're selling to a foreign country, even if it's a government entity, even if it's a quasi-government entity, even if it's a private company, you don't know your buyer as well as they know themselves. You're not participating at
Of
their board
course.
meetings. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't know what kind of financial situation they're in and what kind of a non-financial situation they're in as well. Because it's not always about their inability to pay, it's also about their unwillingness to pay. And how do you
Mm-hmm.
mitigate risk in terms of not getting paid by a buyer in a foreign jurisdiction? And there, of course, there are a couple of options. LC terms, for example, or documentary credits is a great way to mitigate some of that risk.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that EDC offers, for example, is AR insurance, insuring your receivables to make sure that in case you're not paid by a foreign buyer, you get paid by an insurance company. And EDC is a crown corporation, but there are also some private insurers like Alliance
Mm-hmm.
Trade, Aon, and so on, and Coface that provide the same kind of insurance. And
Mm-hmm.
depending on what the company is looking for, that's where they can reach out to and see to get the best quote for themselves. Whereas I am, of course, biased. I am going to say we EDC has its own advantages in comparison to some of the other companies, but protecting yourself from non-payment is quite important. Because let's assume it's a $10 million company that's like the top line sales is 10 million, and they entered a new market and they have an outstanding invoice for 1,000. Well, probably an invoice for $1,000, if it doesn't get paid, they can absorb
Immaterial.
that.
Yeah.
But what if that invoice is not 1,000, but is 100,000? What if it's 1
Mm-hmm.
million? You know,
Mm-hmm.
what are the stakes? If it's a 1 million and you don't get paid that 1 million, how easily can you absorb it? I've seen scenarios where one invoice for a company doing about 10 million and an invoice being in the vicinity of 200, 300,000 was not paid, and the company in a year and a half went under because they were unable to manage their cash flow afterwards. So it's serious matters in terms of like protecting the business. The business
Mm-hmm.
owners have to understand how to mitigate risk when they're doing business with international buyers.
Mm-hmm. Are these products expensive in terms of like getting export credit insurance or like something that companies should always consider, or when the risk profile justifies it?
Well, honestly, it's one of the most complex products to price because you're looking into a number of factors. You're looking at country risk, so which country you're exporting. You're looking at industry risk, which industries the company is operating in. You're looking at buyer risk, so which buyers there are actually their financials,
Mm-hmm.
what they look like, how much information does the trade credit insurance agency have on them. We're looking at, of course, the tenors of the receivable, the limit requirements, and the distribution of risk. Are we looking at one buyer or are we looking at a set of 100 buyers so the risk is not as concentrated?
Mm-hmm.
So when you take all those factors into account, the pricing becomes difficult. So you should always at least strive to get a quote. Usually, with
Mm-hmm.
most of these organizations, getting a quote is free, and
Mm-hmm.
then you can decide if it makes monetary sense for you. But usually, you know, if you are going into a market that you don't know. And I'm going to premise this as well. I'm going to say that even if it's the US, because people
Mm-hmm.
typically assume that, you know, it's just across the board, it's going to be easy to get payment and whatnot. But we see quite a lot of claims coming from buyers not payment in the US. And like
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned earlier, it's not always about their inability to pay, it's also about their unwillingness to pay.
With everything that's happening, well, particularly driven by the craziness in the United States, have you seen any kind of retraction in globalization, and how have the tariffs impacted the Canadian economy? Or I'm assuming like with like everything, it's got pros and cons and opportunities and fallbacks. But kind of like, what's your perspective from the vantage point that you hold?
Well, I guess the biggest perspective that I have is wait and see what will happen to Kuzma,
Yeah.
the trade agreement between Canada, the US, and Mexico, because that's kind of the negotiations are coming up, and that's going to be the
Mm-hmm.
biggest question. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you look at Canada and the tariffs from last year, of course it depends on the province.
Mm-hmm.
Ontario and BC were more affected by tariffs, and Alberta has been
Mm-hmm.
affected by them. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to really understand um, kind of the nuances of how CUSMA will be negotiated and which industries will fall out into those exemptions and which industries will not fall. So it's
Mm-hmm.
early to say what it looks like. Um, it is, and we will wait and see. But on the pro side, because I always like to think that there's a silver lining, I find that this was an opportunity for Canadian businesses to explore other markets because the
Mm-hmm.
amount of conversations that I have had personally about thinking about new markets to export to is tremendous. And one thing I
Good.
will note that it's never about completely forgetting about the US market. No, US
Mm-hmm.
market is next to us. It's a
Yeah.
great market. There's a lot of opportunities there, but it's like the old adage, like don't put all of your eggs in the same
Eggs in one
basket.
basket. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
diversify. And now companies are really thinking about diversification and
Yeah.
thinking about exploring those new opportunities in new markets. So I feel that's the biggest positive that has happened through this.
And yeah, in terms of market redirection from the US, has like have you seen more Asia Pacific, more Western Europe, kind of like where has some of this trade flow redirected?
It depends on the industry, I would say. I've seen some success stories for the energy industry in the Middle
Mm-hmm.
East, but also in Australia, especially
Mm-hmm.
on the LNG side of things. I've seen some success with the agri-food in like I mentioned, in the Asia Pacific markets. So
Mm-hmm.
depending on the industry, different companies finding different successes in different places. And also Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Europe is also a great example because, of course, it's a market that is able to pay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, makes sense. I mean, Coface, I think it's a French company that provides the credit export insurance. Um,
Yes.
Shifting gears, future of business and trade. Like, how do you think that AI is going to change international trade over the next decade?
I am optimistic in that
Okay.
sense because I believe AI should make it easier to do
Mm-hmm.
international trade, at least from a research perspective. Of course, there's a nuance right now with hallucinations and those kind of
Mm-hmm.
things when you're asking AI, so it can sometimes invent things that don't exist. But hopefully, in the future, when it's going to,
Mm-hmm.
more information is being downloaded into AI, people use it better and know how to utilize it. It will be easier, I think, to explore which
Mm-hmm.
markets would make sense for a company's particular business. Also, from a documentation perspective, I think it should make it easier to understand what kind of documents are required and for helping getting those prepared. I still think there's going to be a need for consultants and people who have dealt with documents, but at least it should be easier for the companies to understand that exporting is not as scary. So I'm positive on that side of things. I also hope that, and this is more of a broader conversation, but if we're looking at international trade, it hasn't changed in the last 150, 160 years that much. It's still paper based. COVID
Mm-hmm.
did accelerate some of the things in terms of e-signatures and whatnot, but it's still very basic and early stage. Uh, so I hope that with more technology, we will be able to transform global trade into making it more transparent
Mm-hmm.
and of course decreasing the amount of negative things that are happening in global trade because if you
Mm-hmm.
look at even the container statistics, what is it, like less than 3 or 2% of containers are open globally to check what's actually inside. So hopefully it will be a bigger number then, and
Mm-hmm.
there will be an opportunity to make global trade more transparent and decrease some of the negative side effects of that. But like I said, I'm an optimist.
I think most immigrants are optimists if they're taking a chance on uprooting and starting life in a new place. You gotta be, you can't be afraid of change, unless you're pushed out as a refugee or something like that. But for the most part, we as immigrants see the world as half full.
Oh, 100%. A calf half full, and plus the other thing that we have is adaptability. And
Yeah,
I remember reading about this interesting statistic, but don't quote me on this because I don't remember exactly whether the Fortune 500 companies or unicorns, like startup unicorns, but I think it was startup unicorns. So that the majority of unicorns that were started up and became those unicorns, they were
yeah,
started by immigrant founders.
yeah.
So I think that was a very unique statistic because, yeah, when you're an immigrant, you have to learn how to adapt, and when you're a business owner, you have to learn how to adapt as well. So those two things coincide. Just for us, it becomes a little bit of a second nature.
Hmm. Yeah, I know. I completely agree with you. I mean, may I say that the immigrants rule the world? I mean, like, you don't need to look further than like Microsoft or Nvidia or Google. Like, yeah, maybe, but even the Google founders, Sergey Brin, came. Where did he come from? I think he came from
This,
Belarus.
I know for sure from the Soviet Union, but I don't remember which
Yeah,
particular
yeah.
part of it.
Well, I mean, his dad was a PhD, and so he was a professor, and he relocated states. But the other, like when I look at my own primary observation in terms of our portfolio companies, the best founders that we find are ones that have some form of that have overcome some form of adversity. We love athletes, we love farmers. So like they're the hardest working people that you can find. There's another stat that the vast majority of U.S. presidents came from some form of adversity, like divorce or one of the parents died or something like that, which forced them to be resilient. Angela Duckworth, UPenn professor, talks a lot about, like, she's written a book about grit and resilience. But it's as an immigrant, you have to have grit and resilience and adaptability in spades.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's definitely the issue because
Mhm.
when you come to a new country, trying to adapt is not easy
Nope.
because there's a lot of challenges that go from a cultural perspective, from a non-cultural perspective, language barriers, other kind of barriers that come
Mhm.
when you're an immigrant. So going through all that does create resiliency.
Okay. If I can just take you back to the previous point that you were making, I'm actually very interested because we're, I can't disclose it publicly, but we're working on something around legacy and traditional industries. And so I'm looking to get your perspective as to, you said international trade hasn't changed much in the last 100+ years. Things are still done in the old way. Some of the stuff we're working on is kind of integration of this, because you have the vessel owners, you have the freight forwarders. You like it's just paper. And even with Canada Customs, they have to get paper stuff. And if the case configuration differs, the shipment gets held. And then, like, isn't it like if you have 10 units of something, but it's packaged in 2 boxes of 5, isn't the same thing as like 1 box of 10? But it doesn't work that way. So where do you see the opportunities in international trade in terms of if you are a startup founder, you're looking to disrupt it or looking to introduce a product or a service?
Well, first of all, to your point, the devil is in the details when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to international trade. Your paperwork has to be impeccable and has to be very correct. And that's actually goes back to your earlier question in terms of one other difficulty that Canadian businesses face. Because when
Mm-hmm.
you're doing business in locally or just with the US, the paperwork is good, but there could be uh, discrepancies that no one really cares about. But whereas
Mm-hmm.
when you're going globally, you may need to make sure that your paperwork is very on point, and it becomes a bit of a new challenge. So I've seen those challenges as well, especially when I was working at HSBC in the trade finance desk before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then, in terms of, but speaking about HSBC, so to give you an example, HSBC tried to disrupt that market and
Okay.
still is working on that, utilizing blockchain technologies. and
Okay.
bringing freight forwarders, custom brokers, customs themselves, insurance companies, buyers, sellers, all on one platform to make sure that uh, trade can be done digitally. But the challenge is when you're doing through blockchain, you need to have everyone on board. Everyone has to be there. But how do you make sure that all of those parties, and some of those parties can be different jurisdictions, one party can then
Hmm.
fall off and you need to bring a different party?
Hmm.
It's a big undertaking. So the
Hmm.
question is, how do you make, so for a startup founder that's thinking about an idea, how do you take and make that simple? What do
Hmm.
you create to be able to make
Hmm.
the digitalization of trade quicker?
Hmm. Hmm.
Maybe it's taking an aspect of a part and making
Hmm.
working on that. Maybe it's looking at the whole thing in general, but it's a chunky process. And
Yeah.
HSBC has had some success, but I think it's a long way before it becomes globally adaptable.
Um, Thank you for saying this. And we experienced it firsthand because when we're trying to aggregate the international trade, like we're dealing with suppliers that are using EDI. And I get it from an terms perspective, EDI kind of was the standard many years ago. Some have API, some have EDI, some are forcing us down the CSV path. So it's very disaggregated in terms of a standard. And so what I think that is needed is multimodality, so that you can kind of remove that friction. So be able to ingest to um, both ingress and egress points to be irrespective of what exists currently, because you're not going to go and change what currently exists. So you have to kind of slowly transition onto a new platform or new way of doing things. Um, do you think that are you seeing examples where AI has made advancement in this space to make it faster? We talked about blockchain. Blockchain is a different technology.
Yeah.
What's nice about it is it's very secure and executes perfectly when you have all of the right parameters in place. But kind of like, what are you observing in that space?
From an AI perspective, I haven't seen personally any big movements
Okay.
on that. Like I said, I'm more hopeful that AI will bring some of those advances
Yeah.
and some answers in the future. But right now, it hasn't changed a lot. I guess the
Mm-hmm.
biggest advantage where AI comes at the moment is maybe filling in some of the documents that already exist and making
Yeah.
sure that the documents are coherent and uh, what's the right word for it? And standardized. That's kind of it. But right now,
Mhm.
yeah, like I said, AI is early stage, but we will see how that will track in the future and
Yeah.
what founders will come up with in
Mm-hmm.
because I think there's a market for that, and I think there's a demand for that, especially when like I said, we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
securitization, making sure that the goods that are being transported, especially dual use goods, all of that is
Mm-hmm.
protected.
Yeah, I'm very happy to hear you say that. Like we just released a feature for some of our clients that allows them to create and update purchase orders using their voice. So 11 Labs bot or WhatsApp or Telegram or SMS text or email, whatever way they want to create or update this. And as you know, a purchase order document and a pro forma invoice, the data doesn't necessarily match, but we're using the AI to match the information, trying to identify unique identifier and using semantics. So like that, this actually works, and that has created a lot of efficiency in efficiency for our clients, because now I don't have to go through emails and try to chase this, and that kicks off a process where the supplier has to verify. Once the AI has taken, they have to verify that the information is correct, because then we're automatically pushing it out to the freight forwarders so that they can share it with Canada Customs or other customs authorities.
So
So
that is
it's
a great
possible. Yeah. Yeah.
example of how you can use AI for that.
Mm-hmm.
Taking that information that you have in your brain and just downloading it, and the AI and do its magic to make sure that
Yeah.
it's all comprehensible and easy to absorb.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Same idea was you can look at contracts, for example. If you have a
Mm-hmm.
standardized contract, uh, and you need to adapt it instead of going and manually adapting it. Just use AI to kind of adapt the necessary fields.
Agreed.
But
Agreed.
it all depends on how you utilize AI. I guess the biggest question is don't replace yourself with the AI in that sense, because you're still the
Mm-hmm.
expert, you're still the
Mm-hmm.
company, especially if you're talking about businesses, you're still the business owner. So you don't
Mm-hmm.
want to make sure that you are there double checking. So going back to trust but verify scenario,
Mm-hmm.
but it's easy to quickly verify and make sure everything is correct than just to write from scratch.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I know that we're coming on to time, but I have a couple more questions that I wanted to ask you. And
Of course,
um, one of the question is, what's a belief that you hold strongly that many successful business people would disagree with?
that many successful business owners would
Yeah.
disagree with. I guess the belief, I don't necessarily believe that sales is everything. So of course you need to have sales for the business to strive.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I see business owners chase the sale without thinking about the consequences of the sale. Because
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, uh, sometimes yes, you sold the product, but then you didn't think about how to ship that product to
Good.
that market, and that
Yeah.
could cause issues. Or you sold it, but you sold it on 120-day terms, and that really disrupts your working capital cycle. So
Mm-hmm.
um, it sometimes, if it's, let's say, a $10 million company and they received a $50 million contract,
Mm-hmm.
that can really hurt the company as well, because if they're not prepared to execute on such a large contract,
Yeah.
they may be happy, yes, we can
Got a big
grow five
sale.
times in size,
Yeah.
but at the
Yeah.
same time, if you're not prepared for that, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
be very hard to maintain it. I've
Mm-hmm.
personally seen more companies fail from success, from
Really?
growing too fast, than from downturns or economic recessions and whatnot. Just because if you're not prepared for to execute on that, it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
it's going to affect the business, it's going to affect your
Mm-hmm.
reputation, it's going to affect the mental health of your employees at the end of the day if they're rushing and
Yeah.
trying to fulfill those orders. So
Yeah.
I think that would be the biggest thing that I find, is that it's great to have good sales, but you need to make sure that you have the capacity to execute on them. And if you
Mm-hmm.
don't have a pathway to increase that capacity, maybe you need to go and borrow some money to get some new machinery. Maybe you need to find a strategic investor to come in and help you with
Mm-hmm.
that. And sometimes maybe as the CEO, you need to step down and find someone who has experience
Yeah.
with leading a sizable company, because that's another nuance, right? Like when you're a small business, it's one approach. When you're mid-market, it's another approach. When you become large, it's another approach. So maybe you
Yeah.
don't have the expertise to be here when you're here, so you need to step
Mm-hmm.
down and bring someone who has, even if you're the founder. So but yeah, I would say sales is the bigger one. You
Yeah.
have to be happy about your sales, but also be strategic about them.
Appreciate it. Yeah, you have to have a strong foundation upon which to build. What's the best advice you have ever received, Samir?
From a personal perspective or from a business perspective?
Both. You choose.
Huh. I received so many interesting advice over the years, but I guess the thing that really stuck with me,
Mm-hmm.
and the thing that I work on every day, or kind of think about every day, is just be yourself. I think
Mm-hmm.
nothing, be that on a professional level, be that on a personal level, being genuine, nothing will replace that. And
Yeah.
that's how, again, going back to your earlier conversation about building networks and being out there in the market, that's how you build relationships. If you're
Yeah.
yourself, you will build those good relationships around you. And of course, at the end of the day, you will not be friends with everyone. There are going to
Mm-hmm.
be people that are not your people, and that's fine. That's, you have to accept that. But
Yeah.
if you are not being genuine, people will sense the fakeness, and it will uh, do more harm than good. So be
Mm-hmm.
yourself, don't be afraid to be yourself. Sometimes you might need to wind down depending on your sense of humor. I wind down my sense of humor because I'm from Eastern Europe, so I can be very direct and I can be very
Yeah.
cynical. So I down it down a little bit.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you have to be genuine.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you. Like some of the jokes that you would make in your country of origin, they just don't land the same way here in Canada.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, if I remember correct, you're from Bulgaria as well, right? So
Yeah. Yes. Yes, I
you
am.
you would have a similar sense of humor to me.
Yeah, 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 for sure, for sure. I mean, like, it just kind of reflected on my conversation with my daughter last night when she was interviewing me. Like, I like probably the biggest shock that they had when it came to Canada is political correctness. That concept didn't exist back then. What you see is what you get. Like, if it's on your mind, it's on your lips. Whereas here, everything is just all communication in Canada. At least that's my perspective, go through some form of a filter before it goes out.
Yeah, maybe it's not a bad thing to have a little bit of a filter now and then. So
Yeah, I don't disagree. There's never there's never such thing as like as being all bad or all good. It's typically a spectrum and just kind of matter of perspective as to where it lands on the spectrum. Last
yeah,
question for you, Samir. What's the kindest thing anybody has ever done for you?
the kindest thing.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, like when you say the kindest thing, the first person that comes to mind is my mom, actually.
Okay.
And my mom has done a lot to help me grow as a person and as a
Mm-hmm.
professional. And with everything that she has done over the years, even now, like she's coming here this Monday, and she's already like, even now coming here is always thinking about, okay, what do you want me to bring from back home and all those kind of things.
Yes. Yeah.
So I would say nothing can replace the kindness of a mother.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think what she has done for me, uh, it's
Sacrifices that.
all the sacrifices, all the late nights, all the nuances.
Mm-hmm.
Not to go into too many details, but I think that would be the main person. Of course, like I don't want to disregard like what the types of things my dad has done for me as well, and my wife and some close friends and
Mm-hmm.
some not so close people too. But I want to
Mm-hmm.
really focus on my mom in this answer. It's a very good question, actually. Thank you.
Yeah. How often do you get to see your mom?
Not as often as I would like. We chat nearly with my parents on a daily basis. I try to
Okay.
give them a call on a daily basis to have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation and see how they're doing. Because Azerbaijan is far, we and it's expensive, to be honest, to travel there and back. So
Mm-hmm.
we were there last summer.
Mm-hmm.
So this time my mom is coming. My dad is taking care of my grandma back home, so they cannot come at the same time. It's a good reason. My grandma is still
Yeah.
alive and healthy,
Yeah.
but at the same time, someone still needs to be there. But yeah, it's hard. Like once a year, maybe if we're lucky, a bit more often. But so far, like once a year. During COVID, for example, I haven't seen them for 4 years since I moved to Canada.
Wow.
So it does become difficult, and I'm an only child, so I really miss my parents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but what can you do? That's the life of immigrant.
That's right. That's right. Um, would they ever consider immigrating to Canada, or home is home?
We'll see, to be honest, Maxim, on that. While my grandma is still alive, definitely not, just because
Mm-hmm.
with her there, it's kind of she wouldn't move and it would be very hard. But then at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, you see the challenges. Okay, like I'm in my when I moved here, I was 30, and it was I speak English. It was easier to adapt. With my parents, they have their life. My dad is an entrepreneur. My mom teaches at the university back home. For them to adapt from scratch
Mm-hmm.
would not be as easy. And I don't want to
No.
take it out of their, kind of a day-to-day life and bring them
Mm-hmm.
here and be
Mm-hmm.
and be the center of their life. That's selfish.
Okay, 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 okay. Well, Samir, I really enjoyed the conversation with you. I got to learn more about you, got to know. I mean, obviously, we've known each other, not as close as we know each other now, but I'm happy to have had you on the podcast and looking forward to continue the conversation. And definitely to anybody listening out there looking for export help, how do they get in touch with you? Just reach out to you on LinkedIn?
LinkedIn is the best place to go. Like, as you know, I'm an avid LinkedIn user.
Hmm.
So, if they have questions, please reach out. Happy to have a conversation. And if they need to navigate them internally within the EDC world. But if I may, Maxim, never to overstep here, I would also encourage people to check out the Global Nomads podcast on YouTube and on
Of
Spotify.
course, of
uh,
course.
it goes back to our immigration story, because what we try to achieve with the podcast is to help immigrants, and
Hmm.
be that existing immigrants, new immigrants, or people who
Hmm.
are actually born here as well. To be honest, there are a lot of
Hmm.
advice that the professionals providing there that is beneficial to people that may either don't know about them or forgot about those type of things.
Hmm.
So we really try to bring professionals to share really
For sure.
valuable life lessons to build
What's
life in Canada.
what's the one podcast episode or guest from the Global Nomads podcast that really stands out for you? It's like if anybody associates the podcast, that's kind of the one episode or guest that they associate with.
Well, I will say like all my guests are special because and all the themes that we cover, they're different, because we have
Hmm.
entrepreneurs, we have professionals from different aspects. Like, for example, we already have a career coach talk about career strategy. We had a lady who has a language school talk about languages and accents,
Hmm.
branding. But I'm going to point out the first episode, and the first episode was with Jan Eden, who is a huge connector in the local market.
Yeah, I
She
know her. Yeah.
an amazing person in general, and a
Hmm.
great connector, a great
Hmm.
professional. And
Hmm.
she was the first guest, and she was the first person I bounced this idea of in terms of starting the podcast, or one of the first people. And I would say watch that episode because that's special, and it's
Yeah.
a fun episode as well, because it was the first time I was doing this thing, and I was new to it, so I wasn't as
Yeah.
experienced and a little bit clunky. But the perspective that Jan provides is amazing to build a foundation. And then, of course, afterwards, people can watch whatever they like, depending on what they're trying
Hmm.
to learn.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's amazing, and I mean, she's a super connector in the city, and she's very thoughtful in terms of how she curates connections or how to make introductions, the dinners that she holds to make sure that whoever, like if it's somebody coming from outside Calgary, how does she connect them into who does she connect them? Like, yeah, great person to know. Um,
Yes.
absolute pleasure to have you on. If somebody wants to pitch you to come on as a guest, do they just reach out to you on LinkedIn and say, "Hey, I have a great story to tell"?
To reach out to me on my LinkedIn.
Okay.
Always happy to have a conversation. If there's people who want to sponsor it, also reach out to me on LinkedIn.
All right. Here
Yeah.
comes the call to action. Perfect. No,
Oh,
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Samir. It was a pleasure. I know that we have to run off, but let's continue the conversation.
thank you, Maxim, for having me. I appreciate this conversation.
Pleasure. Okay. Bye.